Mistress forces a wealthy billionaire to marry her, but he turns back to his pregnant wife. In the upscale neighborhood of Redwood Hills, where lavish mansions loom behind tall wrought-iron gates, a shocking rumor sweeps across manicured lawns and exclusive country clubs. The reclusive millionaire Alexander Greenwood has left his pregnant wife, Rebecca, for another woman. Whispers echo in the marble halls of social galas. Who is this mistress, and how did she manage to lure him away from a devoted wife who carries his unborn child? Yet beneath that polished veneer lies a storm of lies, betrayal, and desperation. The tangled web of secrets threatens to unravel, and all eyes watch, breath held, as the truth comes crashing down. Redwood Hills woke each day to the quiet hum of expensive cars and the crisp bark of purebred dogs walking on manicured lawns. This was a neighborhood where people valued appearances above all else. Its gated community boasted immaculate streets lined with perfectly trimmed hedges, each house more splendid than the last. In the largest, most ostentatious mansion at the end of Willow Crescent lived the Greenwood family, headed by none other than the esteemed entrepreneur and philanthropist, Alexander Greenwood. Alexander, or Alex, as his close circle sometimes called him, was a tall, handsome man in his early 40s. Dark, neatly combed hair framed a face that was kind when relaxed but intense whenever the topic turned to business. He had inherited a chain of boutique hotels from his late father, expanding them into a multi-million-dollar empire known for its old-world charm and exceptional customer service. Despite his wealth and power, Alexander mostly kept a low profile. He had endured enough heartache in public due to his parents' divorce in his youth, and he prided himself on maintaining privacy. Inside the Greenwood mansion, dawn spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows into a spacious master bedroom. Alexander stood there, watching the sun's rays illuminate the wide lawn that stretched behind his property. But his thoughts lingered on the future and the small life that would soon join him and his wife, Rebecca Greenwood. Rebecca was a gentle soul, a former art teacher, with flowing auburn hair and a warm, comforting presence. She had always been the quieter half of their partnership, supporting Alexander's ambitions without a hint of envy. At the moment, she was 5 months pregnant, a blessing they had long awaited. The doctors had advised rest, given her occasional bouts of dizziness. She was carrying precious cargo, after all, and the entire Redwood Hills community knew how dearly the Greenwoods had yearned for a child. But not everything in Redwood Hills was as tranquil as it appeared. Rumors had begun to spread in hushed voices over delicate china cups at high society brunches. Someone in Alexander's orbit, an outsider named Genevieve Harding, had reportedly been vying for his attention. Genevieve, an ambitious and cunning woman in her late 20s, worked in the real estate sector. She'd found success flipping luxury homes in prime neighborhoods and selling exclusive condos to the city's elite. Her reputation for getting what she wanted was as famous as her trademark red lipstick. Redwood Hills might have looked away if all this ambition had been reserved for real estate alone, but the rumor mill insisted that Genevieve was targeting a far more personal prize, Alexander Greenwood himself. Inside the Greenwood home that morning, Alexander made his way to the kitchen. His wife, dressed in a loose maternity gown, was stirring herbal tea. The faint circles under her eyes told him she hadn't slept well. She looked up, greeted him with a tired yet loving smile, and said, "Morning, Alex." "I'm fine," without him even asking. But her hand lingered protectively over her growing belly. He kissed her forehead gently, feeling a swirl of emotions. The pressures of his business expansion had taken a toll, and he could sense a subtle distance creeping between them. They were both anxious about the pregnancy. It had been fraught with complications from the start. But he reassured himself, once their baby arrived safe and healthy, everything would be fine again. "Have you heard from Frederick Dawson about the new hotel's opening date?" Rebecca asked, changing the subject as she sipped her tea. Alexander exhaled, pinching the bridge of his nose. "He says we might need another month. There's a zoning issue near the waterfront property. We're working on it." Frederick Dawson was a close business associate who had helped Alexander streamline a series of negotiations with local authorities. Known for his calm demeanor, Frederick was typically unflappable. If even he was showing signs of stress, Alexander knew the stakes were high. Rebecca nodded, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "You'll work it out," she whispered, as though any louder reassurance might crack the fragile serenity of the morning. He offered a tense smile. "I just don't want any more delays. This project is already behind schedule, and the investors are getting restless." But beneath the talk of business and construction deadlines lay something unspoken. Rebecca, though gentle, had an instinctive understanding of Alexander's moods. She sensed he was weighed down by more than zoning issues. He'd come home late once too often recently, and she had noticed the faint but telling scent of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his suits. She told herself it was probably just a client's cologne or a new air freshener at the office. The alternative, that Alexander was hiding something serious, couldn't be true. Or so she desperately wanted to believe. In Redwood Hills, everything seemed perfect on the surface. Yet behind the grand facades of mansions, storms brewed in secret. As day broke, Alexander and Rebecca tried to hold onto the world they had built together, unaware that it would soon be threatened by forces they had never anticipated. Drama was about to unfold that would shatter Redwood Hills' calm, exposing the darker side of ambition and longing. And at the center of it all would be a dangerously determined woman who cared nothing for tradition, morality, or the sanctity of someone else's marriage. 2 weeks later, the Redwood Hills Country Club buzzed with talk of the upcoming charity gala. The Redwood Hills Gala, an annual affair, was the biggest social event of the season. High-end donors paraded their benevolence in designer gowns, auctioning off art pieces and exotic vacation packages, all in the name of philanthropy. It was a night to see and be seen. Rebecca, with her blossoming belly, had every intention of attending, though she was uncertain about how long she could endure standing in high heels. By her side, Alexander had pledged to appear, but he was more focused on networking with potential business partners than enjoying the evening's festivities. Enter Genevieve Harding. Rumors swirled that Genevieve had landed a seat at one of the prime tables, courtesy of her new friend, the wealthy widow and society maven Olivia Larson. Olivia was known for collecting interesting people in her social circle. She prided herself on being at the center of Redwood Hills' rumor mill, bridging old money and new with equal flair. Genevieve's role as a real estate power player who was forging her path in Redwood Hills attracted Olivia's attention, and the widow had offered Genevieve an entree into exclusive gatherings. The night of the gala, the country club's ballroom glittered under a constellation of crystal chandeliers. Waiters in crisp uniforms glided among guests, offering gourmet canapés and top-shelf champagne. String quartets alternated with jazz ensembles, providing the perfect accompaniment to murmured conversations and polite laughter. Rebecca, draped in a flowing emerald gown that emphasized her maternal glow, stood near the silent auction table. People congratulated her, asked after her due date, offered bits of well-meaning advice. She graciously smiled and responded with warmth, yet her eyes often drifted to find Alexander, who was mingling across the room. When she spotted him, her heart clenched. He was locked in conversation with a tall, striking brunette, with a figure-hugging, ruby-red gown, Genevieve Harding. just by the tilt of Genevieve's chin and the way she swayed closer to him than necessary. Rebecca sensed the conversation was more personal than professional. Rebecca approached them slowly, forcing a polite smile. As she neared, she caught snippets of the conversation. The Redwood Towers project. Alexander. With your backing, I'm sure it'd be a success, Genevieve purred, brushing a stray lock of her dark hair behind her ear. Alexander noticed Rebecca's approach and stepped aside, creating a bit more space between him and Genevieve. "Ah, Rebecca," he said, his voice tensing almost imperceptibly. "I was just discussing some possible investments in the city. This is Genevieve Harding." "Genevieve, meet my wife." Genevieve's lips parted in a gracious smile that didn't reach her eyes. She extended a well-manicured hand. "Rebecca, I've heard so much about you," she said politely. Rebecca took the hand in a brief handshake, noticing the tightness in Genevieve's expression. "Nice to meet you," she managed. The tension in the air was thick enough to slice. "Oh, let me not monopolize your husband's time any longer," Genevieve said, casting Alexander a lingering look. "There are so many people I want to speak to tonight. Enjoy your evening." She turned and disappeared into the crowd. Rebecca's eyes were drawn to her swaying hips, feeling an uneasy knot in her stomach. She tried to steady her breath, telling herself not to be paranoid. She believed her marriage was built on a solid foundation of love and mutual respect. One woman wouldn't shake that, right? Alexander placed a hand on Rebecca's lower back, a gesture that had always signaled protection. "She's just a business contact," he murmured in her ear. "Don't worry." Rebecca forced a smile. "I'm not worried," she lied, placing a hand on her belly. "Your daughter's going to be a dancer, I swear. She's been active all day." His face lit up for a moment as he pressed a hand gently over where their baby stirred. "I'm so glad you're here with me," he said softly. "Let's try to enjoy the night." For the rest of the evening, Rebecca attempted to push Genevieve's image out of her mind. She chatted with other expectant mothers, let wealthy patrons rub her bump for good luck, and tried to savor the event's luxurious atmosphere. Yet, across the room, she occasionally caught a glimpse of Genevieve's eyes tracking Alexander. It left a subtle chill in her chest. The night ended, as Redwood Hills Galas often did, with smiling faces and generous checks for charity. Alexander and Rebecca drove home in tense silence. She wanted to ask him outright if something was going on, but the words wouldn't form. She had always trusted him. If there was something more to suspect, it had to be just in her head. Maybe her pregnancy hormones were amplifying her insecurities. Unbeknownst to her, or even to Alexander, the seeds of doubt had been planted. And Genevieve, cunning and relentless, had no intention of letting them wither. Days turned into weeks, and Redwood Hills had returned to its usual glimmering monotony, or so it seemed. Yet behind the scenes, the rumor mill was working overtime. The volunteer society ladies gossiped at the Redwood Hills Library fundraiser. The fitness buffs whispered during their morning yoga classes by the lake. And every mention circled back to the same scandal. Did you hear Alexander Greenwood was seen leaving Genevieve Harding's new condo on West Briar Street? That can't be right, can it? Rebecca, for her part, tried to remain composed, but every so often an acquaintance would hesitate mid-conversation, searching her face before abruptly changing the subject. She could sense the silent judgments, as though everyone was pitying the pregnant wife. She found it nearly unbearable. One afternoon, while Rebecca was sorting through baby clothes in the nursery, the phone rang. It was Nicholas Price, an old friend of Alexander's from college, who also happened to be Redwood Hills' most sought-after family lawyer. He had guided them through some property acquisitions in the past and had always shown a genuine warmth toward Rebecca. His voice was low, tinged with concern. "Rebecca, I'm sorry to call you out of the blue, but is Alexander home? He's in a meeting. Do you want me to give him a message?" A pause. She heard him inhale deeply. Look, can we talk off the record for a moment? I've heard something unsettling, and I want to make sure you two are okay. Her throat tightened. We're fine, she responded, but the uncertain waver in her voice betrayed her. Nicholas cleared his throat awkwardly. I've heard from a colleague, Genevieve Harding, apparently approached him for some legal counsel. She was, inquiring about prenuptial agreements, specifically about how to challenge them or leverage them in certain circumstances. Rebecca's heart pounded. But what does that have to do with Alexander? That's the thing I'm not sure yet. My colleague didn't say Alexander's name explicitly, but Redwood Hills is a small world. He recognized her from events with Alexander. She might just be exploring her options. But, well, it's concerning. Rebecca listened, paralyzed. I see. Thank you for telling me. Nicholas sighed. I don't want to stir trouble if it's not necessary. But if there's something going on, it's better to be aware than blindsided. If you or Alexander need anything legal advice or just someone to talk to, I'm here. Thank you, Rebecca whispered before hanging up. She sank into the rocking chair by the crib, feeling the weight of her daughter's future pressing against her ribs. She absently stroked her belly, whispering a reassurance to her unborn child that everything would be all right, even as her mind whirled with doubt. That evening, when Alexander came home, she debated whether to share what Nicholas had told her. But as soon as she saw him exhausted, tie askew, stress etched in the lines around his eyes, her resolve faltered. She had always believed communication was key in a marriage, yet fear held her tongue. While Rebecca wrestled with her silence, Alexander was battling his own turmoil. Over the past few weeks, Genevieve had become more persistent. She had an uncanny talent for knowing when Alexander would be at a particular restaurant or property showing. She often found ways to bump into him, always armed with some new business proposal or personal anecdote that skirted dangerously close to flirtation. He told himself repeatedly that he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was a businessman, she was a prospective partner. But guilt gnawed at him, especially when Genevieve's gaze lingered a beat too long or when she stood a bit too close. Her fragrance, a heady mix of jasmine and cedar, lingered in the air long after she left. One late afternoon, Alexander was in his office, reviewing the Redwood Towers investment portfolio. Frederick Dawson had warned him about ballooning costs, and he needed to rethink the project's viability. The door swung open, and Genevieve strolled in as though she owned the place. She wore a pencil skirt and a white silk blouse, her confidence a shimmering aura around her. You really should get better receptionists, she teased, closing the door behind her without an invitation. They barely put up a fight when I said I needed to see you. Don't worry, I told them it was urgent. Alexander frowned. Genevieve, I'm busy. If you want to schedule a meeting, talk to my assistant. She laughed, an almost musical sound. This will only take a moment. I have a new proposal. I'd like you to review some prime waterfront property up north. But that's not all. She leaned against the edge of his desk, ignoring the chair across from him. I see how tense you are. You can talk to me about anything you know. He swallowed, meeting her gaze with caution. I appreciate the concern, but, Alexander, we don't have to pretend. I know your world, even if you think I don't. You're always trying to do the right thing. For your business, your investors, your wife. She paused, letting the last word hang in the air. But you're only human. You can't shoulder everything alone. Alexander felt his frustration flare. This is crossing a line, Genevieve. I'm married. My wife is pregnant. I don't know what you're implying, but... She moved closer, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. I'm implying that you deserve happiness, Alexander. Real happiness, without the burdens of family expectations and old ties. Her eyes flickered, her face alight with a strange determination. People in Redwood Hills love to talk about moral codes, but they'll still betray you when the chips are down. Don't you want someone who sees you for who you really are? Before he could reply, she lightly touched his arm. The contact was electric, alarming him. He pulled away, standing abruptly. "I think you should go," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Genevieve studied him, a slow smile curling her lips. "I'll go for now, but remember, there's more than one way to get what we want." She placed a thick folder on his desk. "Call me when you're ready to discuss the waterfront project. I think it could be lucrative for both of us." With that, she turned and left, leaving Alexander alone with the echo of her words. That night, he drove home in a haze of confusion and guilt. He resolved once again to set clear boundaries. However, Redwood Hills had a way of magnifying secrets. The more he tried to hide the simmering tension between him and Genevieve, the more curious everyone became. And the more curious they became, the more uneasy Rebecca grew. The seeds of doubt, sown weeks earlier, were now sprouting into tangled vines. Rebecca fought them daily, telling herself that Alexander's late nights and flustered phone calls were all part of a busy professional life. But the rumors wouldn't stop, and neither would Genevieve. For Redwood Hills, a scandal was brewing, one that threatened to overshadow even the most lavish galas and philanthropic deeds. And in the midst of it all stood a pregnant wife, a conflicted millionaire, and a mistress who would stop at nothing to achieve her goal. The Redwood Hills rumor mill reached a fever pitch when Genevieve Harding appeared at a community board meeting, publicly challenging certain zoning restrictions that stood in the way of her new project. Alexander, already embroiled in negotiations for his own developments, found himself blindsided when she named him as a potential collaborator during her presentation. In a matter-of-fact tone, Genevieve addressed the assembled community leaders. "With Alexander Greenwood's expertise and influence, we can turn Redwood Shore into a prime resort location. I look forward to finalizing these details with him." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Among them was Rebecca, who had forced herself to attend out of a sense of responsibility. She was now in her 6th month of pregnancy, feeling bigger, more exhausted, and more emotionally frayed than ever. She had come hoping to support Alexander, but he hadn't even known she would be there, nor had she known. Genevieve planned to name-drop him so brazenly. The shock on Alexander's face told Rebecca everything she needed to know. This wasn't something he'd agreed to. After the meeting, Redwood Hills community leaders dispersed in small knots of curiosity. As Alexander tried to intercept Genevieve in the hallway, she was already swarmed by officials who congratulated her on her bold plan. Rebecca stood at a distance, her hand resting on her swollen belly for reassurance. She watched as her husband finally managed to pull Genevieve aside. Their exchange was brief, but heated. She saw Alexander's jaw tighten and Genevieve's calm, almost mocking, half-smile. That night at home, Rebecca confronted him. What was that about? Why did she say she'd be finalizing details with you? Alexander, pacing in the living room with the city skyline behind him, raked a hand through his hair. "She's trying to trap me into partnering with her. She never mentioned my name to me before that meeting. She blindsided me." He sank onto the sofa, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry, Rebecca. I know this is stressful. I should have told you about her more clearly from the start. She's persistent, and I tried to handle it, but she's stepping up her game." Rebecca's voice trembled. "Are you having an affair with her?" The question burst out before she could swallow it. Her eyes brimmed with tears she refused to let fall. "No," he said emphatically, looking at her with pained honesty. "I promise you I'm not." "But," he trailed off, uncertainty flickering across his features. "But you've thought about it?" she whispered, feeling an ache spread through her chest. She was terrified of his answer. He shook his head, eyes dark with regret. "She's attractive, and I'd be lying if I said I never noticed. But I never wanted no. I would never choose her over you." A tear slipped down Rebecca's cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "Then why does she think you might?" "She's acting so bold, like she already has you in her pocket. He exhaled heavily. Because she's manipulative. She knows I have some influence in Redwood Hills. She knows the Redwood Towers project is important to me, and she's been dangling a collaboration that could solve some of my construction and zoning headaches. Plus, I think she just wants to be with me in whatever twisted sense. Rebecca's heart clenched with a mix of relief and dread. What are we going to do? The rumors are flying. Even Nicholas Price called me. Worried about prenuptial agreements, Alexander stiffened. She's talked to lawyers. About me? Apparently, Rebecca said, sinking onto the sofa beside him. This is serious, Alex. His mind whirled with the possible consequences. Redwood Hills was a wealthy community, but it was also a small social pond. A single scandal could topple reputations, sever business relationships, even ignite messy lawsuits. And so, a new plan took shape in his head. I'll confront her, he decided, not just in passing. I'll arrange a meeting, somewhere public enough that she can't twist the situation, and I'll make it clear that this stops now. No more name-dropping, no more illusions about me leaving my wife. Rebecca tried to ignore the knot in her stomach. I trust you, she said softly. Please, be careful. The next afternoon, Alexander chose a local cafe, an upscale but still public venue, to meet with Genevieve. Sunlight streamed through tall windows onto polished tables set with fresh flowers. The aroma of freshly ground coffee filled the air, offering a sense of normalcy that belied the tension at the table where Alexander sat. Genevieve arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a stylish blazer over a fitted dress. She offered a bright smile to the hostess and slid into the chair across from Alexander without waiting for an invitation. I hope I haven't kept you waiting too long, she said, crossing her legs. Traffic was horrible. Alexander ignored the pleasantries. You blindsided me at the board meeting, he began, his voice firm. I never agreed to partner with you on Redwood Shore or any new development. She feigned innocence. Oh, come on, Alexander. Don't be so dramatic. We've talked about doing business together. I might have mentioned Redwood Shore's potential in passing. You did mention it, but never in a way that implied a formal partnership. You deliberately misled the entire board. He placed his hands flat on the table. I won't tolerate you using my name to further your own interests without my consent, nor will I allow you to spread rumors about us. Genevieve leaned forward, lowering her voice. Rumors, you say? Don't pretend the Redwood Hills social scene isn't half your marketing strategy. You're one of the wealthiest men in town, so naturally people talk. But if you really want to silence the gossip, we can handle this quietly. We don't have to be at odds. Alexander felt his frustration spike. Stop with the insinuations. My wife is pregnant, Genevieve, and I won't let you keep harassing me or her. She sighed, drumming her nails on the table. I was hoping we could come to a mutually beneficial arrangement, but if you insist on being so moralistic, well, maybe we do this the hard way, he frowned. What does that even mean? Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, the carefully polished veneer fell away, revealing a steeliness beneath. It means you'll marry me, or you'll pay for crossing me. Alexander stared at her, stunned. A disbelieving laugh escaped him. You've lost your mind. You're saying I should divorce Rebecca, who's carrying my child, and marry you? Genevieve shrugged elegantly. There are ways. Yes, Redwood Hills might gossip, but they'll move on quickly when something new comes along. And I can make life very difficult if you reject my proposal. Your Redwood Towers project could be stalled, or your new investors might suddenly withdraw. Perhaps we can even create a scandal so large that you'll have no choice but to distance yourself from Rebecca to protect your business. The weight of her threat hung in the air. Alexander clenched his fists under the table. You can't be serious, he hissed, keeping his voice low to avoid a scene. I won't abandon my wife and unborn child. Genevieve leaned back, arms crossed. We'll see. You have a lot to lose, Alexander, more than you realize. Sometimes what seems impossible becomes the only solution. She stood abruptly, smoothing her skirt. I'll give you time to think this through, but if you try to shut me out, I promise you'll regret it. She left, leaving Alexander feeling like the world had spun off its axis. He'd expected a manipulative pitch, but an outright ultimatum was far beyond anything he'd imagined. He sat there, staring at the untouched coffee in front of him, his mind racing with possible outcomes. He knew Redwood Hills was governed by the powerful influences of reputation and money. If Genevieve was as connected as she claimed, she could very well cause havoc in his business dealings, or worse, drag Rebecca into a public scandal at a time when she was most vulnerable. He realized with a sinking heart that he had underestimated Genevieve Harding. She was more ruthless and more desperate than he had anticipated. And now the question lingered in his mind. How far was she willing to go to get what she wanted? Over the next week, Redwood Hills buzzed with the latest developments in Alexander's business. Word spread that the Redwood Towers construction had hit another roadblock. The official line was that a labor dispute was delaying progress, but inside sources whispered that certain permits and inspections were being held up unofficially, of course. No one could prove who was pulling the strings. Alexander saw the writing on the wall. Every day brought new complications or cancellations. Investors expressed concern and potential partners became cagey. He spent countless hours on the phone, trying to smooth ruffled feathers, but the abrupt shift was undeniable. Genevieve was making good on her threat, or at least someone was helping her orchestrate it. Meanwhile, Rebecca felt the change at home. Alexander was consumed by worry, anxious and on edge, even when he tried to reassure her that everything would be fine. She found him awake at odd hours, staring into the darkness, deep in thought. She tried to comfort him, but her own fears were growing too. One afternoon, while Rebecca was resting in the sunroom, the doorbell rang. She pushed herself up, her belly making it difficult to move swiftly. At the door, she found a deliveryman holding a bouquet of vivid red roses. "These are for you, Mrs. Greenwood," he said politely, handing over a small envelope along with the flowers. Surprised, she thanked him, wondering if Alexander had sent them as a romantic gesture to alleviate her stress. But her heart sank when she read the card, "To my future sister wife, from Genevieve. I promise we'll work it out, or else." Rebecca's face went pale. She read it again, as though hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something benign. They didn't. Her hands trembled as she walked to the kitchen to set the bouquet on the counter. The twisted message set off alarm bells in her mind. It was taunting, menacing one more step in Genevieve's attempt to rattle their marriage. Later that evening, she confronted Alexander with the card in hand. "She sent me this. She's gone completely insane." He looked at the note, his face darkening with anger. "I'll put a stop to this," he growled. "She's harassing you now. That's crossing the line." But a stone of dread weighed on Rebecca's chest. What if we can't stop her? What if she's got so much power in the city that your business falls apart if you defy her? Alexander's jaw tightened. "I don't care. I won't let her do this to us." In desperation, he called Nicholas Price and arranged an emergency meeting. The next morning they gathered in Nicholas's office, a sleek, modern space in downtown Redwood Hills. Nicholas listened intently as Alexander recounted Genevieve's threats and the sabotage that seemed to be unfolding in his business. Nicholas tapped his pen against a yellow notepad. "Legally, this is a minefield. Unless we have proof of her direct interference emails, recorded conversations, a money trail, we can't get a restraining order or pursue criminal charges for blackmail. She's smart enough to keep her hands clean, and as for the note, it's threatening, but not explicitly illegal. Unless she threatens violence or breaks stalking laws, The police might not be able to intervene. Alexander raked a hand through his hair. So what? We just let her get away with it? Nicholas hesitated. We can do some digging. Hire a private investigator maybe. Try to trace the disruptions in your projects back to her. But that takes time, and if she's methodical, it might not lead anywhere conclusive. Rebecca's voice was small. Is there any chance she'll just give up? Nicholas sighed. If her aim is to marry Alexander or ruin him, giving up doesn't seem likely. She's playing a long game. The question is, how far is she willing to go? Alexander set his jaw. I don't care how far she goes. She's not forcing me into anything. I'd rather lose everything than betray my wife and child. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. She reached for Alexander's hand, gripping it tightly. In that moment, a flicker of hope kindled inside her. Despite Genevieve's relentless attacks, the bond between her and Alexander still held strong. They left Nicholas's office with more questions than answers, but they had a plan: investigate discreetly, document every incident, and stand united. Yet as days turned into nights and Redwood Hills churned with rumors, it became clear that Genevieve wouldn't back down. If anything, her tactics escalated. It happened one rainy afternoon. A thunderstorm had rolled across Redwood Hills, darkening the sky, and the mansion's power flickered ominously. Rebecca was upstairs when the front door burst open. She heard Alexander's voice, raised in anger, followed by a shrill retort. Alarmed, she hurried down the sweeping staircase to find Genevieve in the foyer, water dripping from her umbrella. Alexander stood before her, blocking her path further inside. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, hardly containing his fury. "You can't just barge into my home." Genevieve's eyes flashed. "I called, but you never pick up. This couldn't wait." Rebecca paused halfway down the stairs, her heart pounding. She watched as Genevieve pulled a sheaf of papers from her purse. Her voice was cold. "I have in my hand a set of documents that will ruin you, Alexander. Emails from investors, witness statements, details of your father's old business dealings that you've conveniently kept under wraps. If the press got wind of this, your entire reputation would be destroyed, not to mention Redwood Towers would never be completed." Alexander glowered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "My father's dealings were above board." Genevieve laughed without humor. "Don't be naive. The world loves tearing down the mighty. Whether or not it's all true won't matter once headlines start swirling. And if that's not enough, I'll plant rumors about your current finances, your fidelity, your father's personal vices, anything that gives you or your wife a permanent black mark in this town. Redwood Hills is vicious. They'll devour the scandal. You're a monster," Rebecca managed, descending the last few steps to stand beside her husband. Her voice shook with rage and protective fury. "You can't do this to us." Genevieve arched an eyebrow. "I can and I will, unless Alexander does what I'm asking. And I'm only asking for a simple thing, marriage." Rebecca's vision blurred with disbelief. "Are you out of your mind?" Genevieve's expression softened oddly, as if she believed her own twisted logic. "I've watched Redwood Hills from the outside, always wanting to be a part of it. When I finally got in, I saw how shallow and transactional most of these relationships are. But Alexander, you have something real, a brilliance, a genuineness I've hardly ever found in this town. You think I'm merely a gold digger? Maybe once, but I've earned my own money. What I want from Alexander is far more personal." Her eyes flicked to Rebecca. "You have no idea how lucky you are. But your luck is running out. If Alexander doesn't leave you and marry me, I'll destroy everything you both hold dear." Rebecca's hand flew to her belly as she tried to steady herself against the wave of dread. Alexander placed a protective arm around her. "You're deranged," he spat at Genevieve. "I will never leave my wife for you." Genevieve smiled, almost pityingly. You say that now, but let's see how you feel when your business empire crumbles and your name is dragged through the mud. How will you protect your wife and child then? Even if Redwood Hills stands by you, which they won't, you'll be financially ruined under constant scrutiny. Is that what you want for your baby girl? Alexander's eyes narrowed. The storm outside seemed to intensify, thunder rattling the windows as if echoing his turmoil. He felt Rebecca trembling beside him. The weight of the threat pressed down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. Slowly he spoke, picking each word carefully. If I even considered your insane proposal, you'd have to guarantee Rebecca and our child's safety, financially and personally. Rebecca gasped. Alex, no! She turned to him, her voice cracking. You can't even entertain this. He looked at her with anguish. I won't let her destroy us, he whispered. But we need time to figure out how to stop her. Genevieve watched the exchange with a triumphant gleam in her eye. You love your wife, that's painfully obvious. So I know you'll do anything to protect her. Make no mistake, Alexander, the first mean what I say. Marry me or face ruin. Alexander felt a burning hatred coil in his gut, but he forced it down. I need time, he ground out. You're asking me to upend everything. This isn't an overnight decision. Genevieve nodded curtly. You have 2 weeks, maximum. Otherwise, these documents find their way into the hands of the Redwood Hills Chronicle and certain influential figures in City Hall. She turned to leave, pausing at the door. Think about the future of your child, Alexander. This is the only way to shield her from the storm you've created. With that, she departed, leaving only the fading echo of thunder and the swirling tension in the foyer. Rebecca stared at Alexander, her tearful eyes full of disbelief. Please, Alex, there has to be another way. He pulled her into his arms, holding her trembling form against him. I'm going to do everything I can to protect you and our baby, he murmured, wishing he could believe his own words without reservation. Those 2 weeks were an endless haze of anxiety. Rebecca's pregnancy made every moment more fraught. A stress could impact her health and the baby's development. Alexander took calls at odd hours, met with private investigators, tried to reason with potential allies in Redwood Hills. But all roads seemed to lead to closed doors and half-hearted responses. Whispers traveled fast that something big was brewing in the Greenwood household. Everyone sensed a shift in power, yet no one wanted to risk their own position to assist Alexander. Genevieve, for her part, remained elusive. She did not harass Alexander daily, she didn't need to. Her ultimatum hung over him like a guillotine. On the 11th day, a packet arrived at Alexander's office. It was a copy of the damning documents Genevieve had boasted about. He skimmed through them, his face growing paler with each page. While some were exaggerations or half-truths, enough valid points existed to cause irreparable harm if made public. With a bitter heart, Alexander realized Genevieve had orchestrated this scenario with chilling precision. She had just enough real evidence to cast a dark shadow on his father's and his own dealings. Combine that with Redwood Hills' penchant for scandal, and he'd be fighting lawsuits, fleeing investor panic, and facing a public relations disaster, his pregnant wife caught in the crossfire. It's not worth it, he muttered to himself in his darkened office. I can't risk Rebecca's health or the baby's. I'll marry Genevieve temporarily, buy us time, and figure out how to dismantle her blackmail from the inside. The logic tasted like poison on his tongue, but he saw no other recourse. That night, he sat Rebecca down in the library. She looked up from the baby name book. She'd been reading, her eyes tired and filled with longing for normalcy. Alex? She asked softly. Sensing his turmoil, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I think I have to marry Genevieve, publicly. At least in some legal sense. She yanked her hands away, face contorted with shock. No, that's insane! He bowed his head. I know. I hate it, but if I refuse, she'll release everything she has. Investors will drop me, Redwood Hills will turn their back on us. I could lose the business, maybe even this house. Our reputation will be destroyed. He reached for her hands again, desperation in his voice. I'm not doing it because I want her. I'm doing it to protect you and our daughter. Tears streamed down Rebecca's cheeks. But what about me, Alex? This baby, everything we've planned, our entire life together. He closed his eyes, feeling his own tears threatening to spill. I love you, Rebecca. That will never change. But if we don't play along, she'll ruin everything. We'll fight it from within. I promise I'll find a way to overturn her blackmail. But for now, I need to put on this sick charade. And I need you to trust me. She stood abruptly, her pregnant belly making the movement cumbersome. You're asking me to stand by and watch you marry another woman? Her voice broke on the last word. Alexander enveloped her in his arms, ignoring her initial attempts to push him away. Eventually, she clung to him, sobbing into his chest. They stood that way for what felt like hours, both hearts breaking under Genevieve's merciless hand. The wedding took place in a private courthouse ceremony, hastily arranged. Genevieve insisted on some semblance of pomp, despite the hush-hush nature of the event. She wore a demure white dress, but the triumphant glint in her eyes could not be concealed. Alexander stood rigidly by her side, formal suit pressed and tie stiff. The officiant, oblivious to the emotional carnage, recited the vows in a monotone voice. Rebecca did not attend. She couldn't bear it. She stayed at a friend's house, Rose Fairchild, a kind-hearted woman who had taught art with Rebecca years ago, trying to soothe her trembling nerves. She felt numb, devastated, and humiliated. The knowledge that her husband was only sacrificing himself to protect her and their unborn child was the sole thread keeping her from unraveling entirely. After the brief ceremony, Genevieve turned to Alexander with a proud smile. "Thank you for doing the right thing," she said, lacing her arm through his for a staged photo. "This is only the beginning." Alexander looked straight ahead, jaw set in stone. His heart pounded with a single thought: I will tear down every piece of this sham, Genevieve, and set my family free. But for the moment, Redwood Hills reeled with confusion. Some people heard rumors that Alexander had quietly divorced Rebecca. Others believed they had an arrangement. Most were just shocked that Redwood Hills' most enviable husband had tied the knot with an audacious newcomer. Speculation soared, fueled by the glimpses of Genevieve's smug satisfaction at local gatherings. Rebecca, meanwhile, tried to maintain a semblance of routine. She decorated the nursery in pastel yellows and greens. She attended prenatal checkups alone, fighting back tears when the doctor asked why her husband couldn't join her. She practiced her breathing exercises, bracing for the day her child would come into this world, a world that had turned upside down overnight. Little did she know that Alexander was working tirelessly behind the scenes to gather evidence against Genevieve. He hired private investigators, tapped old connections, and set traps for Genevieve's co-conspirators. A single shred of evidence that could prove her blackmail or sabotage would be enough to unravel her carefully woven net. And all the while, Redwood Hills watched from the sidelines, hungry for each new twist in the scandal that had shattered the facade of perfection. It took nearly a month, but the pieces finally began to fall into place. Alexander's discreet inquiries yielded a breakthrough. Genevieve had an accomplice in City Hall, a mid-level clerk named Martin Kincaid, who'd been funneling insider information and helping block Alexander's permits. Additionally, a forensic audit of Redwood Tower's finances revealed suspicious wire transfers to accounts linked to Genevieve's real estate ventures. It was the thread they needed, a tangible link, tying her manipulations to illegal activity. At first, the private investigator wasn't sure if these leads would be enough to charge Genevieve with blackmail. But Alexander and Nicholas Price, the lawyer, were confident they could wield this evidence to negotiate a deal. If Genevieve didn't back off and release him from this sham marriage quietly, they would hand the dossier straight to the district attorney. But time was of the essence. Rebecca's due date loomed and her health was precarious. Stress weighed heavily on her, causing dangerous fluctuations in her blood pressure. The nights were longest for her, filled with silent tears and fears for her child's future. The showdown came on a crisp morning. Genevieve was at the Redwood Hills Country Club, sipping a latte in the lounge after a meeting with prospective buyers for her latest development. Alexander arrived unannounced, storming past the hostess with a quiet resolve. He spotted Genevieve chatting with a small group of acquaintances, wearing an elegant suit that made her look every inch the successful magnate. "Genevieve," he said, his voice low but resonating with authority, "we need to talk, now." She blinked in surprise at his uncharacteristically firm tone, but she dismissed her companions and walked over to a corner table. "What's this about?" Alexander removed a thick folder from his briefcase, thumping it onto the polished wooden surface. "This is about the end of your little game." Genevieve flipped open the folder, her expression turning unreadable. The color slowly drained from her face as she scanned the evidence, financial records, correspondences with Martin Kincaid, notes from Redwood Hills officials. "Where did you get this?" she hissed, trying to keep her voice steady. "You underestimated me," Alexander said, eyes cold. "I may have played along with your blackmail to protect my wife and child, but did you really think I'd do nothing behind the scenes?" "It's over, Genevieve." She snapped the folder shut, her jaw clenching. "This doesn't prove anything, so I pulled a few strings in City Hall, everyone does. And these wire transfers are open to interpretation." Alexander sighed as if weary. "You can cling to that story, but we both know how this will look to the district attorney. Conspiracy to commit fraud, blackmail, sabotage. Redwood Hills might be shallow, but they relish a scandal. You'll be tried and convicted in the court of public opinion before the actual courts even convene. Your real estate empire will crumble, and everything you've built will be worthless." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Unless you do exactly what I say." Genevieve glared, wrestling with her fury and fear. "What do you want?" "Annulment," Alexander said succinctly. "You'll sign the annulment papers this afternoon. You'll publicly state that we had a misunderstanding and that you wish me and my real wife, Rebecca, the best. You'll withdraw any claims on my father's legacy or Redwood Towers and vow not to contest anything in the future." Genevieve's eyes flickered with rage, but she managed a brittle smile. "And if I refuse?" He tapped the folder again. "I'll make this public, turn it over to the authorities, and you'll be finished. There won't be a single developer in the state willing to work with you after this. You might even face jail time." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the faint clinking of cups in the lounge. Thunder rumbled in the distance, echoing the tension. Finally, Genevieve spoke, her voice low and full of venom. "Fine. You win this round, Alexander, but don't think I'll forget." He retrieved the folder, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I don't care about your grudges anymore. As long as my family is safe, you can hate me all you want." Genevieve snatched her purse and stormed out of the lounge. Alexander watched her go, exhaling a breath he felt like he'd been holding for months. This nightmare was nearly over. Later that evening, Alexander returned to the mansion that had been a silent refuge for Rebecca since the marriage fiasco. Rose Fairchild had helped watch over her during the day. The baby's nursery was almost complete, pastel walls decorated with whimsical animal decals. He found Rebecca upstairs, sitting in the rocking chair, her eyes distant. When she saw him in the doorway, she rose uncertainly, her face a mixture of longing and sorrow. "Is it done?" she asked quietly. Alexander nodded. "I've got the annulment papers." Genevieve is signing them first thing tomorrow. She won't bother us again. Rebecca's breath caught, tears pooling in her eyes. She reached for him, and he closed the distance, wrapping his arms around her. The floodgates burst, and she sobbed against his chest, tears of relief, grief, and exhaustion. He held her, stroking her hair gently, murmuring apologies for everything she'd endured. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into her ear. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just couldn't see a better way to protect you and the baby." She looked up at him, eyes swollen from crying, but love shining through. "I understand. I hate that you had to do it, but I understand." Just then, Rebecca winced, a gasp escaping her lips. Her hand flew to her belly. Alexander's eyes widened. Is it time?" She nodded, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and anticipation. "I think so. The baby's coming." A whirlwind followed, frantic calls to the hospital, a rush to get her in the car, and a tense drive through Redwood Hills' winding roads. In the bright lights of the maternity ward, the hours blurred, punctuated by pain, contractions, and urgent medical instructions. Alexander stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, offering words of encouragement. Finally, with a few last pushes, the hospital room filled with the sound of a newborn's wail high, piercing and miraculous. A girl, their daughter. She emerged into the world, tiny and perfect, placed gently into Rebecca's trembling arms. Both parents stared in awestruck wonder, tears of joy streaming down their faces. Alexander pressed his lips to Rebecca's forehead. "You did it," he whispered, voice quavering. She held their baby, who quieted at the sound of her mother's heartbeat. In that moment, the months of fear and turmoil seemed to melt away, replaced by a profound sense of relief and hope. Genevieve's manipulations, the forced marriage, the heartbreak, they were all overshadowed by the radiant miracle of new life. And so Alexander Greenwood returned to his true wife, free from the clutches of a mistress who had tried to tear them apart. While Redwood Hills might buzz with gossip for a while yet, a new beginning lay in the arms of their newborn daughter. The future was finally theirs to shape together. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster tale of betrayal, blackmail, and redemption. We've witnessed how a cunning mistress, fueled by ambition, nearly destroyed a millionaire's life, but in the end, true love and determination prevailed. Alexander refused to let adversity break his devotion to Rebecca, and despite the darkest hour, they emerged stronger than ever, welcoming their precious baby girl into a fresh start. Redwood Hills might continue to chatter, but the Greenwoods have proven that no amount of gossip or manipulation can shatter a bond forged by genuine love and hope. If you enjoyed this dramatic journey and want to see more stories packed with intense twists, unexpected turns, and heartwarming resolutions, remember to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more riveting tales. Until next time, stay tuned for another story that dares to dive deep into the complexities of human relationships.